Domínguez. La doctora Maribel
Dr.
Domínguez
Maribel Dominguez Dominguez. Dr. Maribel Dominguez Dominguez is a biologist by the Autonomous Juarez University of Tabasco, a master on sciences by the postgraduate studies, also a doctor on the handling of forestry resources by the University of Valladolid in Spain. She's a researcher and professor at the University of Tabasco since 1991. Her work focuses on the study of the symmetry of the mangrove species in Tabasco, as well as the assessment of the growth of seedling of Rhizophora mangrove. She has published books on the mangroves of Tabasco and the context of vulnerability of the coast species, as well as the values assigned to the mangroves of Tabasco, and she edited that as well. Both books supported by the Ministry of the Environment. She has taught in bachelor's degree, master's degree, and PhD courses. She is currently working in CONACYT. Likewise, she has given training courses for professionals, technicians, producers in the coast of Tabasco for a better handling of the forest resources as well as the handling of mangroves, among others. She has published 23 scientific articles, 2 books, manuals. She has been part of national and international congresses since 2013. She is part of the Technical Academy of the state of Tabasco for CONAFOR, interacting with mangrove producers of the state of Tabasco. She's member of the National Research Center in CONACYT Level 1. Please go ahead, Dr. Maribel Dominguez, with your presentation. Thank you very much. I am really pleased to present the work that I have carried out with other researchers and the postgraduate students. I'm going to be sharing my presentation now. Here it is. The topic that I will be discussing today is the characteristics of the mangroves of the state of Tabasco and the forest handling that they are giving on them. What is the current status and what have we been doing in the state in this specific aspect? We're going to begin by focusing on what the handling encompasses, and then I'm going to be explaining some slides of what is being done, has been done in other countries, and I will also speak about the handling that we are given in the state of Tabasco, what we have in our state, and above all, what can we do when it comes to the handling that we can give our forest resources, in particular to our mangrove ecosystem. So what is forest handling? What does it imply? We have been talking about restoration, conservation, protection, use, and handling means all of these actions that lead to putting order and protecting and preserving, restoring, and making the best use of these resources, as well as the environmental services. In this case of the mangrove ecosystem as a forest ecosystem, it is basic to understand the ecologic principles, the characteristics of the species and what they require in order to grow and develop. It is important that within forest handling to respect the functional integrity as well as the interdependency of the resources. Likewise, it is also important not to decrease or to put the productive capacity under risk. It should be maintained throughout the ecosystem in order to continue working on it, using it, etc. What do we mean with the general law of sustainable forestry handling or development? We know what the benefits are of the mangroves. We have been discussing this throughout these talks, so I'm not going to get deep into that, but we know that we can obtain many resources, tangible and intangible, coming from the forest, especially coming from the mangroves. In order to handle the ecosystem of mangroves, it is important to consider the factors that have an impact on its presence. Here we have hydrology, determining the flood levels, and that create a gradient of salinity within the mangrove. The landform and the soil that determine the presence of nutrients. And this is important because it has an influence on the presence of each species. In the state, we have 4 species: red mangrove, white, black, and the bottom mangrove. These factors will determine that a species or another to be present in an area of the ecosystem, but not only to have its presence, but also it will determine the growth of the trees in it. So we can have shorter trees in saline soils and taller and well-developed trees in areas with less salinity on the soil or the water. And this leads to obtaining productivity within the ecosystem. So we need to keep in mind that these factors determine the presence and the growth, and finally the productivity. For instance, the second image that I have here is an image from a mature black mangrove forest. I took this picture in 1990 when I was working on my dissertation, my bachelor's degree dissertation in the mangroves of Mequacan's lagoon. Look at the state. This is a mature forest, a close, dense, compact mass, and practically there's no regeneration here. It is important to know all the characteristics and to understand what the ecosystem is like, because from that we will see differences in what we obtain and what we can do about it. In order to preserve resources that are in adequate conditions, we make use of forest handling to rehabilitate the mangroves that have been damaged, like the ones that we see here in this image. We have practically lost the border that we had there, and we are being exposed to the black mangrove trees. In case of deforestation, in case of fire, in case of pollution, and for the sustainable use, it is necessary to have a good forest handling. That is why we consider we need to develop new alternatives that will make us have a better maintenance and recovery of the mangrove forests. In one of the studies that we carried out, we worked with soil analysis to determine what the characteristics of the soils are in a mangrove. Here we have the types of soils. Some of them are rich in organic matter, like schistosols. And here we see a domination of these types of soils that have a salt saturation. We have to determine how much of these resources that we have on the soil are formed with these features. We see a dominance in 56% of the Solon tracts from a total of 48,707 hectares that were determined within the mangroves of the state. We have to see now what has been done in other countries, what we observe in other countries when it comes to the handling of the mangroves. Here we have a few examples. For instance, here in Sundarbans, in Bangladesh, in India, and Asia, that they have 940,000 hectares. They have been using and handling since 1759, and they have established 148,000 hectares of plantations from a period going from 1966 to 2001. We are talking about mangroves here. They have been used for using the wood. So they have been using a lot of these wood for these purposes. And it is important to assess the surface of the mangroves. Does it grow or does it decreases depending on the type of handling, like in this case? Obviously, it plays another role, and in these areas, it is important to protect the people, the housing. In the case of India, we have other mangroves that have also been handled. In this case, they are as forest reserves, and they have applied cutting cycles to make use of the wood. Also, they are in protected areas with extractions of woods of wood that have been limited, and it is important to keep that in mind. In other cases, like in Malaysia, since 1902, they have been working with operational structures for the plants in order to favor natural regeneration of the mangrove. Here, they apply these forest clearings, concentrating the growth in the best individuals. This is really important because in previous years, when they didn't know much about forest handling, they selected in a different way. And what does this mean? This means that they were using the best trees. And when I say best, I mean thick and straight and tall trees, vigorous trees that were being extracted. And they were leaving behind weak, sick trees with infestations. If we're going to manage the forest, we need to do it in a correct way, trying to bring it to a better site. They have used 30 years projects in Malaysia, and in mangrove forests in Sarawak and Sabah, they are assigned as forest reserves that are permanent since 1922, and they have been using for producing wood, for coal, for posts. It is important to understand what other countries are doing, because we can learn from them and see what we can do and what we mustn't do. In Africa, in Kenya, Tanzania, mangroves are protected by the legislation. They refer to the use and the collection since the 19th century. They have a small-scale restoration. Kenya has mangroves on arid zones, as we have been observing in other studies. And these mangroves obviously are quite short and they require a specific type of management. These mangroves have been used for wood, for construction, for timber, and they eliminate the shorter trees. In Brazil, mangroves are also being managed, and in this case, Brazil is one of the countries with the greatest extension. I think it's the second one or the third one in the country with the largest extension, with 1,300,000 hectares of mangrove. In this case, since 1760, they have been using these resources through the use and the supply of the mangrove. You know that it has tannins that is used for tannery, in this case in Brazil. They have been making this use of the bark of the mangroves and the wood and the timber. They also use them from other species. Many mangroves in Brazil are in protected areas, whether they are national, state, or municipal. And they also have extractive reserves in the north of Brazil with a management focus. In this case, the control of the local population has been more effective than the federal protection. It is important to take care of the mangroves. People should really feel that they are part of their community to protect them and to better manage them. In Brazil, they have been working in restoration, in the healing, logging after hurricanes. It is necessary to have a good management of the resource because mangroves get damaged, they lose their roots, and they get decayed and weakened. So we need a good management implementation after that, and they did that after the presence of a hurricane in this example, and surveillance as well as protection of the resources is important. Colombia, it's another example. Most of the mangroves are in the coastline in the Caribbean, and they are solidified because we can see what we can do in mangroves. Colombia has mangroves that are 35 meters high in the Pacific and 18 meters in the south of Cartagena. But on the west, they have arid dwarf mangroves in the islands and in the coastline. Out of the 35,000 hectares, 28% is being used for preservation. 29% is being restored because it was affected, and 43% is being used, a sustainable use for different purposes. And we should not forget that people in the communities own these resources. They have the resource there, they have the mangroves, and they have the right to use it in the best possible way. That's why researchers are there to guide them so they can use them in the best possible way for them and to maintain them throughout time. We have performed inventories to establish management plans. We have plantations, restoration, hydrological restoration, and we have produced plants in community nurseries. In the project, and I'm talking about my project and the project of the other colleagues that have been collaborating with me. One of them is Dr. Joel Zavala, Dr. Pablo Martinez, and there's also a group that has been participating from the social department, and they have been working quite hard along with the communities. And here I can say that in the management of the mangroves, we need to support locally, to find support locally on the management plans of the land, of the common land, with the participation of the surrounding communities. We cannot go and say, do this or do that, if they are not aware, if they don't agree, if they are not convinced. We need to have the participation of the people. That's a priority. It is important to consider the connection between natural resources and the way of life of the population, because in that way we can understand what their needs are and what they require for their survival. There should also be a will coming from the country to manage the mangrove. We have already mentioned this throughout the Congress. In order to favor the strategies and the policies that will guarantee a sustainable management of the ecosystem and to promote the economic development, we need a correct coordination between programs and sectors within the government to make it work in the coastal zones. There should also be a good territorial ordering to prioritize the goals and to establish programs for a sustainable management of the mangrove. And here I am referring to one of the institutions, which is CONAFOR. You know that there's a close relationship between the activities that they do on the mangroves, as well as Semarnat, the ministry who is going to be recognizing the resource as such. They will provide permits. Profepa, I don't have the logo here, but Profepa is also going to be pending on the resource and to see that the resources are being well used and that there's no logging without any previous authorization. So Profepa participates, and we need coordination between the governmental institutions along with the communities, with each one of the activities that are being done in the case of mangrove management. This project that we are referring to right now was financed by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Protection, CERNAPAM. Now it is called Ministry of Wellbeing, Sustainability and Climate Change. And the purpose of that work was to generate the necessary information, basic information, to formulate a state policy for a better management, conservation, encouragement, and use of the biodiversity within the mangrove ecosystem from the productive processes that will contribute to the improvement of the social conditions as well as economic and obviously environmental conditions in the coastal area. We need a balance between everything that is being done around mangroves. In this work, we took a tour around the river Tonela that is going all the way from Veracruz to Campeche. We worked on some transects in each area. We were working in the Yucateco Lagoon, in these mangroves, as well as in the mangroves of Sanchez Magallanes, in the Lagoon del Carmen, Lagoon Las Palmas, in mangroves on the Machona Lagoon, in El Cocals Lagoon, mangroves in Mecuacan, in Santa Anita, as well as in the San Pedro and San Pablo rivers. Soil analysis were performed in 20 different sampling sites through the transects. We identified the soils and we studied the geomorphology of the site. Also, hydrocarbon analysis were performed on the soil and they determined the medial fraction and the total amount of hydrocarbon in these soils because we wanted to know what the status was in the mangroves of the state, where many activities, oiling activities have been performed that have had an impact on the mangrove. We also studied the structure of the mangrove. We performed 3 transects per site. Every area was formed by 5 plots, every plot with 4 trees. We measured 155 plots in 10 sites, 620 trees. We used quadrants for this. We considered trees that were at least 10 centimeters in diameter and a minimum height of 1 meter and 30 centimeters. We performed some measurements, dasometric measurements, the total height. In the case of the red mangrove, also we measured the roots, the basal area, the geopositioning of each tree, and we obtained the density of the trees, the index of the site, and the wood volume with the bark. We studied the regeneration of the mangrove, and here we performed, well, we worked on 3 plots. They were chosen randomly within each transect. We had 90 plots in total. We measured the diameter, the height of the plants, and the density of the regenerated plants. Furthermore, we had a social and cultural assessment. We applied several surveys, 806, 487 for the users that go directly to the mangrove. They use the wood, they use it for recreational activities or other activities, and they take boat rides, etc. And 319 surveys were applied to the producers, the owners of the mangroves. This was a representative sample with a 90% of reliability in relation to the people that inhabit these communities. This is an image of the measurements, the regeneration, natural regeneration measurements through these quadrants of 1 by 1 meters. We have some pictures from the dasometric measurements. You can see that we carried out this research and we had the water up to our knees. It was quite high. Here the water was 80 centimeters high, taking data measurements and doing everything necessary for the forest inventory. The height of the tree, we measured it with different tools, and the height is an important variable that will show us the true growth of the tree. The basal area shows the competence to which the tree is put under, and this competition can be a bilateral one due to the trees that are higher or taller than the other, that tree, and also from shorter trees. And for this, we mean the competition for obtaining light, obtaining space, and also obtaining the profit of the nutrients. And in the case of trees, there's also water competition. The waters are in the water. They have enough water in this case, but if we refer to dry mangroves, in that case, they would compete to get the water for themselves. In this case, that doesn't apply, but that is really important to see and understand this competition between the trees, and this competition may enable the trees to grow correctly or prevent them from doing that. We were measuring the diameter of the trees. One of the trees that we observed here had 7 meters high, so we could actually measure the diameter. We found well-developed trees, quite tall. We inventoried them, and this variable will represent the growth of the tree, and it is closely related to the growth of the canopy and the photosynthetic functions that it performs and that will make the tree actually grow. We measure the canopy, and the diameter of the tree will show what we observe on the canopy. We also did some surveys, like I said, and regarding the hydrocarbon data, and this work was supported through CERNAPAM with resources coming from Pemex. And what we wanted to know was to understand what the soil was like, how polluted the soils were. The soils where we were working, so we could know what we needed to do. Samples were taken from the soil, and we determined the hydrocarbon, the total hydrocarbon and the medial fraction on the soils of these oil fields with mangroves. You can see, and according to Regulation 138 of Semarnat, for the use of agricultural and forest soil, in this case we are referring to mangroves, which is a forest resource, recreational and for conservation, it is allowed to have a fraction lower than 3,000 milligrams per kilogram. If we find more than that, then it means that the soil is highly polluted and it shouldn't be used for that purpose. And look at the data, all the data in red, they are surpassing the allowed limit, what the regulation says. We have data that get up to 169,000 milligrams per kilogram of soil in a heavy fraction. There are sites in the petrochemistry, in the river Yucateco, in river Tonalá, Cinco Presidentes, Cárdenas, in the lagoon del Carmen, in some oil fields in Mehuacán, in the Caparroso Centla fields. Many places are surpassing the limits that the regulation establishes. So what can we do with these sites? And we will see later on. Here we have some data, some average, bathymetric average of the adult trees of the mangrove species in each one of the sites where we worked. For instance, we have the white mangrove that gets to 33 centimeters in diameter, a total height of 17 meters, density of 178 trees per hectare. We have another case where we find the white mangrove with 730 trees per hectare. 1,111 for the same species. And for black mangrove, we have 309 and 8, but in other sites we have lower densities of black mangrove, like 308 per hectare and 43 centimeters in diameter, 19 meters high. These are really tall trees that are going to give us a better number. We have large diversity because we have well-developed trees in these sites, where we also have these pollution conditions. I have here some examples from other countries, and we can see the case of the height and the basal area, the biomass, the aerial biomass, the underground biomass, and it is important to understand what type of condition or age it is referring to when it comes to the mangrove. In the case of Australia, we have this primary forest with Avicennia marina with a biomass of 144 megagrams per hectare and a height of 7 meters. There are other cases like Indonesia, where the mangrove is under a concession zone for its management. In this case, we have a biomass of 43 to 90 megagrams per hectare, heights of up to 20 meters, and a basal area of up to 9 meters. The condition, it's important for the case of Indonesia, a primary forest of Gymnorrhiza has an aerial mass of 436 and a height of up to 26 meters and a basal area of 36 meters, square meters. What does this mean? What does it mean to have these basal areas? For instance, if we have basal areas that go from 1 to 10 square meters per hectare, then we are talking about a forest that is growing, a forest that is still not mature enough, that is not a closed forest. If we talk about from 10 to 20 square meters per hectare, then it is a forest that is already mature, that they already have they are already closed enough and regeneration is not happening. If we talk about higher basal areas, higher than 20 per hectare, then we are talking about a totally closed canopy where the regeneration, natural regeneration, is practically non-existent. So we need to keep in mind, what does the basal area mean? What does it reflect? Because in that way, we are able to understand what are the conditions of the mangrove and what can we do in case we need to have a better management to support this type of ecosystem. Here we have another example in the case of Sri Lanka. The height of the canopy 4 or 5 meters and a basal area between 13 and 20 meters. For the case of the French Guiana, we have this species, Rhizophora, we can see it on the table, and we have heights of up to 23 meters and basal areas of up to 34 meters per hectare. There's another example like Florida in the US, where the height of the canopy is low, it's 4 meters, and we have basal areas of 13 square meters per hectare. Where is Tabasco in all of this? And here's the information of Tabasco from La Solución Somos Todos in Paraíso, Tabasco. This is an UMA that is working And here we have the aerial biomass, the average of 141 megagrams per hectare, average carbon of 70 tons. And this is a dissertation by a student. She worked with me and with other collaborators, and we could see that for the case of Colombia, we have data a little bit higher when it comes to the biomass. This is by Yepes. In Siancán's mangroves, we have biomass data of 176 megagrams per hectare. This is by Adame. And for another site in the peninsula, we have a low biomass of 5.3 with carbon of 2.5 megagrams. We know that in Yucatan, we have different species of mangroves, and some of them are less developed. According to Latcher in 1977, the biomass can oscillate between 120 megagrams per hectare. And for the case of the aerial biomass, it's 5.3 megagrams that correspond to dwarf forests in the case of the Yucatan Peninsula. We also work to determine the diametric classes of the species of the mangrove in the state. What do we want to see here with the diametric classes? They allow us to see the structure of the mangrove, the composition of the species, but above all, the age and the size, the development of the trees. And here we can see in which age group we can find the mangroves for each site. For instance, for this common land of Aquiles Cerdán, we have black mangrove trees, which is a black blocks there, and we have these sizes. They are quite short, not so many trees. When it is more, when we have more trees, and we can see here more well and developed trees. However, what does this mean? How much are we obtaining? And in this case, we see the red mangrove dominating the site. However, the red mangrove has ups and downs within the structure of the ecosystem. We have more trees from 10 to 20 centimeters. No, sorry, from yes, and from 20 to 30 we have a few, and we have a little bit more for 30 to 40 centimeters, and it starts decreasing, and over 50 centimeters we find none. So what happens with the white mangrove? The white mangrove is one of the species that is being used the most, and you can see the structure it has. We have a few trees of the different ages. From 30 to 40 centimeters, we can see that there are no trees at all. So there's not a structure that can be maintained or that refers to having all the different classes of diameter in order to ensure the survival, the growth of the trees. To maintain the number of trees in proportion, it requires a descending curve from the young trees to the oldest trees, because naturally we will see a decrease in the number of trees according to the age and the growth. But we should be able to maintain that curve in order to continue using the resource. For the case of the land Campo, Mecoacán, and Libertad in its first section in Paraíso, it has the same situation that in Sánchez Magallanes and Barratupilco in Comalcalco. You can see the mangrove situation there, and for San Pedro in Centla. Here we have a lack of diametric classes in mangroves from 30 to 40 and 40 to 50. This means that perhaps this resource is being used more on these sizes of diameter, and also in the case of the diametric class from 20 to 30, from 10 to 20 centimeters, we don't have so many trees in this site. So what is happening with the white mangrove? Is it being used mostly because it grows the best, and it also has a better use for these regions? So we are overexploiting this resource. Here we have a relationship between the height and the diameter to see the behavior of the mangrove, the four species, and we can observe that the growth is closely related. We have the red mangrove with a higher relationship for 20 centimeters, and this corresponds to a height of around 15 meters. Doctor, I'm sorry, but could you please finish in 4 minutes? We worked with the quality of the site to determine the conditions in which the mangroves are, and we were able to observe that the conditions vary. We found 5 different site qualities. Here we have the red mangrove trees that vary from low quality from 11 meters up to 19.6. We have data from the densities that were found, and what I want you to see here is that the trees with heights smaller than 30 centimeters, these are non-consolidated trees, trees that will die, most of them, and only 25% will survive. So they can move to the second stage. And after that, only 50% will carry on. And finally, in order to get trees that are higher than 3 meters, we'll only have 28% of the trees left. Here we have a pie chart on the use of the mangroves. We already know them quite well. We have also the situations of the unrooting of the trees. And we were able to notice what people actually feel about this and see what is being done in the mangroves. We were able to determine as well the surface. Here we have it considered for each one of the species of mangrove, how much is being covered in the surface. And finally, what we did was to get to a management potential, which is what we wanted to observe. What can we do with these resources? Use them, protect them, restore them, depending on the conditions. We will be able to determine what should be done with these resources. This is the case for the use, forest use. Where can it be performed and when can it be performed? For protection, we have the mangroves that are in the best conditions, in the best soils, those that are part of the biosphere reserve. They need to be protected. These mangroves that are protecting the the riverside, and also the mangroves that need to be restored in the different sites where the soil use has changed and where we have higher rates of hydrocarbon pollution. This is the data. I will go faster. And finally, we get to the regionalization of the potential of the management of the mangrove. Here we have some conclusions. I already mentioned some of them. We determined 5 quality index for the site as well as the medial height and dominance of the trees. We see productive, vigorous trees. We determined the extension of the mangrove with an extension of 41,498 hectares, and the conditions that are being proposed by the communities and authorized, they have been quite conservative and using low extractions and leaving enough trees after the logging, protecting the water bodies, and by applying a selective logging. I have been working on this, and then we saw some changes in Article 60 on the law of wildlife, which is regulating the mangroves. And we know that the species are threatened. They are considered within the regulation 59. Currently in the state of Tabasco, we are working through UMAS for the conservation and the use of the forest resource. And if you need more information, we have all the data already published in these books: Forest Management, Sustainable Forest Management in the Mangroves of Tabasco, and the Context of Vulnerability of the Coast Populations. And one of the articles that was released in the Wetlands Journal. We have also done other projects focused on the restoration of the soil that has been polluted with oil, like with plants like Rhizophora mangle. We have the goals here, and we have carried out research from the point of view of dendrochronological point of view. You will see a presentation about that later. And we have determined the age of the trees through these studies, and especially trying to understand if they reflect the pollution of the sites when it comes to the growth of the trees. That would be all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Maribel, for your presentation. We have several questions from the audience, and I will read them now. Dr. Gerardo Miguel Gomez Nieto is saying, in your opinion, what do you think about what has been established by Article 6 of the General Law of Wildlife? Is it forbidden or restrictive for the use of the mangrove, and why? Article 60 of this law of wildlife considers that there should be a restriction of the whole use of the mangrove. However, it is authorized now through Semarnat to use part of that resource in a controlled manner, in a well-managed manner, under certain proportions of this forest resource of the mangrove. It is important that within these plans to consider the conservation of the mangrove, but also there should be there should be something that allows the people to use it. Because otherwise, if we forbid someone to use their resources, then it's going to be counterproductive. We need to allow them. It is considered within humans to use one part of the resource, and currently this implies a management that leads to a selective extraction. We cannot apply it randomly. We cannot cut the trees close to the water bodies. We need to protect them. It is minimum what you may allow to use, and most of it should be preserved and should be managed and preserved the resource as much as we can. We have another question from Luis Alonso Perez Valenzuela. He says, what is the impact of hydrocarbon and what measures will be taken in a wetland ecosystem in the coastline with oil activities? Well, the impact, you already saw it. There are many areas that are polluted. There are many places that require the restoration. And that's why it is important to have management plans. In this work, we are contributing with the sites where we should be working on restoration. We need to find the ways to do it. We need to get to the authorities. We need to come up with the priorities to restore the mangrove sites that are polluted. One more question. Luis Alonso Perez is asking, are you working in a project with CONAFOR to make people aware on the forest management of the mangrove ecosystems? For example, disseminating multimedia information about it? Yes, we are working on projects, and I've had the chance to interact with CONAFOR. We have given training courses. We have been working closely with the producers in exchanging of experiences. We have invited them to know what it is being done in other areas. And we have been doing that here in the country as well as in other countries. We have trained within the country, and we have also received support by CONAFOR so they can go and visit other sites that are working on conservation, management, etc. Yes, we do that. Thank you, Doctor. I have one question myself. In relation to the dependencies of the forestry sector, federal and state, have you adopted any recommendations coming from your work on the sustainable management of the mangrove? That's really important. I ensured to present this work, to present the results to Semarnat, to make them aware of it. In CONAFOR, I presented this to the producers in the college. We wrote 2 books. We went to the communities, to the heads of institutions, and I have tried to spread it as much as I can internally, because these books were written in Spanish and also in English. So what have we been doing with that? We have been doing all that, and we have taken into account, and I'm not so sure if they are paying attention to what I wrote, but I have done everything in my power to make people aware of this. And I have reminded them that there's this information. How it's been done, how can we improve? how can we do the best thing trying to ensure that the ecosystem is maintained? Well, Dr. Maribel, thank you very much for your presentation. We have run out of time and we are saying goodbye for this session at least, and we'll continue with the next one. Thank you.
Adelante, doctor Everardo.
¿Qué tal? Muy buenas tardes a todas.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the Conservation and Management Discussion Table. My name is Everardo Barba, and it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. To start up, I have to share an announcement. The presenter, Carlos Jimenez Arano, wasn't able to join us. Therefore, in accordance to our program, we're going to meet back again at 5:30 in order to listen to the next presentation. Thank you very much. Adelante, doctor Everardo.
Gracias. Muy buenas tardes, gracias por permanecer.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having stayed with us in this table for the conservation and management. It is a real pleasure for me introducing the next speaker, Dr. Ana Lara Dominguez. It's a real pleasure having you here, and please go ahead with your presentation. Hello, good afternoon, and thank you so much, Everardo. So my presentation's name is going to be Water Quality and Tannin as a result of the mangrove in two lagoons of karstic origin. I'm going to repeat the title. I think I did something wrong. Okay, so now I hope you can see my presentation now. So this work is going to be quality of water and tannin as a result of the mangrove in two lagoons of karstic origin in Yucatan's peninsula. This was a work done by Dr. Gabriela Vázquez, Jorge Luis López Portillo, and me. All three of us work in the ecology network for function. So in the Yucatan Peninsula, as we all know, it's made up by different Caucasic origin areas where we can find, which are highly permeable, which is why they flow a lot of underground flows. This underwater flow is made up in different parts of the littorals and within the lagoons that would be I'm sorry, it's just that I have a lot of messages here from the webinar anyway. So this is kind of like the Ria Lagartos Lagoon, as well as the one up north of the Cozumel Island. Both of them are surrounded by mangroves. This project, or the results from this work, are part of the regional effect and installation from ocean energy plants that provide us with key species and coast and also key coastal ecosystem, which is part of what the Mexican Center of Innovation, the CINIE because of the name in Spanish, and the name of the project is Strategic Form Plan and Strategic Action Lines. So within this, what we are assessing a little bit would be the structure of the mangrove as well as the physical-chemical characteristics of the coastal lagoons. So the goal for this work is to compare these two saline and detanine bodies in the lagoon body in the superficial area of the mangrove by also including part of the structure of the mangrove, such as height, depth, as well as the diameter. The methodology might be the one which is used for the different mangroves. We did 10 stations in the lagoon, and we had a mangrove site where we would be measuring the height, diameter up the height to the chest, and we would also see the size of the fringe if it was like a deep or wide type of mangrove, depending on the nature of it. Again? What's happening? We can hear, it's just that I started like once again listening to the introduction, but anyway. I got lost. Where were we? Okay, so up north in the Cozumel Island, we can find a series of lagoons which are associated at link and all are parallel to the coastal line with a sand barrier. We've got the lagoon that we call it Rio de la Plata or Silver River. We also have the lagoon Balem. We have the Monte Cristo Lagoon. And we have all of these three right here. And I must highlight two focus associated to this lagoon system. We can place a series of bariographers in order to detect which one could be sort of like the exchange that we might find present. So very close to the first part, we have this, and we see that the range of uh, the movement is much higher than in the previous two. The one that we have here does record and show what the day mangrove would be and the lagoon. So within the methodology, the water that we would take, so the water that we would sample, what we did with it was to measure different parameters on site, and we would also take some samples to take them to the lab. So within the on-site parameters would be saltiness, temperature, pH, and oxide reduction. This was done through a parametric probe, Myrons as well as EC. So this was the first, with all the data that we had, we did this analysis of main components, and we noticed that there was a separation between the different lagoons. So this one, which would be, this is the first lagoon from east to west and is of Rio La Plata, and the concentration is high in tannins. It has ammonium, phosphate, and silicates. And the idea here was that it would be the depth from 1 to 1.3 meters. The mangroves coverage is quite vast, however, it's high, medium in relation with the others. Now, on the second one, which would be in Paso Valem, from east to west, we would here find what encompasses these stations, which would be the high temperature, the salt oxygen of nitrates, and the depth here was between 0.75 meters and 1.25 meters. The coverage of the mangrove here was lower. And finally, to what would be the eastern side would be the Monte Cristo Lagoon with a high degree of salinity, a high concentration of tannin, and even though this was the shallowest one, it has the highest coverage of mangrove. We also did a comparison between what we were measuring in the test site among the mangroves and the lagoon, and we can also notice here in the acidity level, east to west in Rio de la Plata, which is where we have the highest level of acidity, as well as in Monte Cristo, and in Paso Belén we have different salinity between 40 and 50. I would like to highlight right here that here's where we have one of the connection points and here's the other one. So this is the lagoon that has really the greatest level of exchange because of these two open parts or mouths. So in here we have what would be the structure of the mangrove and the different lagoons. Here we have the open lagoon because also on this one what we do is that we measure, and these are the mangroves that have between 4 meters in height. The ones that have the lowest or the ones that are the smallest would be the Monte Cristo Lagoon. And in the Rio de la Plata Laguna and in Paso Belém, the height are very similar in both of them. Here we have Rio Lagartos. So here we can see this in the Gulf of Mexico. And here we have just one connection piece, which would be on the western part of the system. So what we wrote down here was that there are 10 collection stations, and we also placed some sensors. So we can see here that the ranges are quite lower in comparison to what we had received in the north of the Cozumel Island. This is also very important because here, where we have this sensor is precisely where we have the bridge which connects the continental part with the Cuyo, and it's a very shallow area that's very susceptible to have influences by the wind. Here we don't really have a very, well, we do have a pattern which does increase all values towards the eastern part. So we can see that we have different levels of saltiness, and we also have high concentrations of saliditaline. So as long as this isn't mentioned towards the part where we have the mouth of the Rio Lagartos and also San Felipe, then the saltiness level are more kind of marine, and the concentration of nutrients, oxygen, and temperature are quite high on this area. So here, when we do a comparison between the lagoon, we can see that towards the Cuyo, the salt level is greater in the lagoon than on the mangroves, inside of the mangroves. And we can also see that in the shallow area, the salt level in Rio Lagartos is lower in comparison to the inner part of the mangroves. So we can also say that when we approach the Cuyo, where we find the highest levels of salt, we also have the least height, the shallowest area. And we also have them towards the Coloradas and El Cuyo. It's very important to mention that these ones of Las Coloradas, which is where we find all of the high salt level ones, what we have here is an area of white mangrove, which is associated to a cenote of clean water. So this is a salt level of both lagoons. So we can see that in Cozumel, we really do have a variation between the salt level that might be between 50 and 60 parts per minute, or parts of salt. While in Rio Lagartos towards the Cuyo, we have some salt levels that we record that are higher to 100 parts per thousand, or practical units. And towards the San Felipe mouth, we would find marine level salt levels. Now, regarding tannins, we can observe, well, this is what actually stood out for us the most. The tannin in Cozumel would increase depending on what the salt levels increase, so it would grow accordingly. In Rio Lagartos, however, it was quite little, so this is something that really stood out for us, because that's something that we associated, that despite the fact that these are quite shallow mangrove, the coverage is much better on this lagoon of Monte Cristo. And here we can find this relation between the different salt level parts versus tannin, and we find that it's directly proportional and it has a really good correlation. Also here, all of the salt levels vary very little, and all of the saline are in regards and in relation to this. But if you look at the units of tannins, then we can find even an order of magnitude that's quite, lower. So we can also see the correlation there that is very small for this lagoon. When we compare the intestinal or the inner salt levels of the mangrove, we found that it was very similar. Only on this station, which is the one that I highlighted, the one of Las Coloradas, did we find lower levels of salt. However, the salt level are very similar in both systems. So our conclusions are that the water quality is going to be influenced by the number of mouths or inlet areas and its location. The body of the lagoon, the gradient of the saltiness is going to be much greater in Rio Lagartos, meaning that it goes from San Felipe to El Cuyo by creating a heavy kind of lagoon. While on the lagoons up north of the Cozumel Island, this doesn't happen. Also, the phosphorus and nitrate and ammonium concentration was greater in Rio Lagartos than on the Cozumel Island lagoons. However, regarding tannins, and the concentration of this was much greater in the Cozumel Island mangroves. Now, regarding mangroves, the interstitial or inner saltiness was much greater in the salting levels and lower on the shallow areas. And for the lagoons in Cozumel Island, this was very similar in results. Now, relating the depth or height of the mangroves in Cozumel Island, they are shorter than in Rio Lagartos, and they're more similar to what would be El Cuyo. So for this, what we can observe is that in Rio Lagartos, the height or the mangrove trees are stressed, which is why their height is lower, while in Isla Cozumel or Cozumel Island, these are mangroves which are associated to all of the input of hurricanes, which are constantly shaving them off. So finally, the suggestion is to take all of the salt levels associated to the mangroves, which would be the one in Rio Lagartos, and the Lisaline would be the ones for the lagoons in Cozumel Island. And that was everything that we wanted to share with you. We continue working with this data and performing different analyses, but apparently there's some very important things to see by comparing two lagoons in the same type of ecosystem, but that have very different characteristics, especially because of the number of inlets and their positive reaction. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Ana Laura. We don't have any questions. So we would like to thank you for your time, and we are moving forward with the next presentation. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye. So we are now going to continue with Jennifer Elisa Tamayo Elguezaba. So Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Adelante, doctor Everardo.
Muchas gracias, muy buenas tardes.
Thank you very
Vamos a
much and good
continuar con el
afternoon.
programa.
We will now be
Gracias,
continuing
Jennifer.
with our program.
Nos
Thank
va,
you,
nuestra siguiente
Jennifer.
ponente,
She
Jennifer
is
Elizabeth.
our next speaker, Jennifer Elizabeth Tamayo Elguezaba. Jennifer, go ahead. Thank you very much and good afternoon. I hope everyone will enjoy the presentation, and if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them in the end. So please run the video. This is going to be a presentation regarding the different organ chlorine detected in Trispus truncus as bioindicators of pollution in the protected area of flora and fauna in the Term Lagoon.
Mismos en otros países. En México fue hasta 1991 que, debido al riesgo ocasionado a la salud humana y a los ecosistemas, se comenzó su prohibición, debido también a la capacidad tóxica de estos químicos a bioestabilizarse en el ambiente. En ocasiones estos requieren hasta 40 años para degradarse. Estos se acumulan afectando funciones biológicas y se biomagnifican provocando impactos en el ambiente y en las poblaciones. Siendo ahí donde toma lugar el Trispus truncatus, ya que ocupa el nivel trófico más alto dentro de la laguna, por lo que es evidente que su alimento llega ya a él contaminado. Es por ello que utilizamos muestras biológicas para auxiliar a la determinación de concentraciones de hígado y riñón en este caso. Y a pesar de que el área de protección de flora y fauna Laguna de Términos sabemos que fue nombrada así desde 1994, hoy en día se siguen llevando a cabo actividades extractivas debido al continuo incremento de asentamientos humanos en la zona. Por ello la contaminación sigue en aumento y es debido a eso que debemos actuar de una manera rápida y eficiente para tratar este tipo de contaminantes, utilizando los vindicadores como una herramienta efectiva para llevarlos a cabo. Nuestros objetivos se dividen en dos, generales y particulares. En este caso, nuestro objetivo general es cuantificar las concentraciones y los tipos de contaminantes organoclorados presentes en las muestras de tejidos de órganos internos, en este caso hígado y riñón, en las toninas Strepsis truncatus varadas dentro del área de protección de flora y fauna laguna de términos. Nuestros objetivos particulares se dividen en cuatro, que es identificar los diversos tipos de COPS y cuantificar las concentraciones obtenidas de estos en las muestras de hígado y riñón de toninas varadas, así como describir el comportamiento de las concentraciones obtenidas de plaguicidas contrastando las concentraciones entre tejidos y grasas, y evaluar el papel de la tonina como una especie centinela o bioindicadora de la contaminación dentro del área, y proponer recomendaciones para futuras acciones de restauración y mejoramiento del área. Nuestra área a tratar se ubica dentro del Golfo de México y específicamente en el estado de Campeche. Como observamos en la imagen del lado derecho, observamos la laguna de términos y su área y su extensión. El apartado de materiales y métodos nosotros lo dividimos en diferentes secciones. En este caso comenzamos con la colección de muestras, en donde se inició desde el 2011 hasta el 2018 para este estudio la recolección de las muestras en el área de protección. Todo esto se llevó a cabo mediante el protocolo de la Profepa y realizando la identificación de los organismos y adquiriéndolos en campo, donde se tuvo la mayor limpieza posible, para después envolver cada una de las muestras, rotularlas y colocarles la fecha y el tipo de tejido y colocarlas en bolsas herméticas para llevarlas después a su debido procesamiento en el laboratorio. La siguiente sección fue resguardo y análisis de las muestras, donde se registraron los datos como el sexo, la talla, el año, las coordenadas, temporadas y la clase de edad. Se trasladaron al laboratorio a tratar en EPOMEX de contaminantes orgánicos persistentes, en donde se llevó a cabo toda la digestión desde la purificación, extracción y cuantificación, para posteriormente llevar a cabo el análisis de gabinete y realizar la georreferenciación de los varamientos y las zonas afectadas por dichos contaminantes, y finalmente poder brindar recomendaciones para futuros proyectos dentro del área debido a estos contaminantes o plaguicidas. Para la sección de determinación de plaguicidas organoclorados, como ya mencionamos, se llevaron al laboratorio de EPOMEX, para donde se realizó el análisis de acuerdo al método de Wolbomas y Samowski del 2008, utilizando un cromatógrafo de gases. También se llevó a cabo la utilización de columnas cromatográficas capilares, y durante el procedimiento también requerimos temperaturas desde 50 grados centígrados hasta 250 grados centígrados, y el volumen de inyección que se utilizó fue de 1 microlitro. Y bueno, estas son algunas de las imágenes que pudimos obtener a través de todo el procedimiento, desde la colecta hasta su procesamiento, y a través del sonificador y del cromatógrafo de gases. Para la sección de trabajo de gabinete se llevó a cabo la utilización de la paquetería NADA del programa RStudio, en donde se recabó toda la información y de ahí se pasó a una base de datos en Excel, de tanto de las muestras como de los compuestos obtenidos, y después se llevó a cabo la georreferenciación a través del programa de QGIS 3.10 para la localización de las actividades agrícolas, así como de los varamientos. De los resultados tenemos que por años se encontraron 33 en total. Aquí, como se muestra en las imágenes, es la ubicación de dichos varamientos en la zona, en la laguna de términos, siendo el año 2015 el mayor afectado con 9 varamientos, seguido por, si lo identificamos por sexo, la mayoría de los sexos encontrados fueron machos, que fueron 18 organismos. Se encontraron crías de 0 a 18 a 210 centímetros, en total 16, seguido por adultos 10, y principalmente en la temporada de nortes con 12, seguido de la temporada de lluvias con 11. Para las concentraciones obtenidas de plaguicidas encontramos 7 grupos diferentes que se dividen en 20 compuestos. Estos de los dienos, por ejemplo, comenzamos con el aldrin, dieldrin, endrin, endrinaldehído, endrincetona. De los endosulfanes tenemos a los 3, endosulfan 1, endosulfan 2 y endosulfan sulfato. De los hexaclorociclohexanos tenemos a los 4, que son alfa, beta, gamma y delta. Para los DDTs tenemos los 3 metabolitos, que son para-DDT, para-DDE y para-DDD. De los heptacloros encontramos epoxido heptacloro y heptacloro, y de los clordanos encontramos a cisclordano y transclordano, para finalizar con el metoxicloro. Para las muestras de hígado, que en este caso fueron 29, el grupo que más estuvo presente fueron los clordanos con un 37%, seguido de los dienos con un 21%, y en tercer lugar tenemos a los DDTs con un 19% de aparición. Mientras que para las muestras de riñón, que en este caso fueron 26, los compuestos que estaban más a la par fueron clordanos y dienos, con un 35%, seguido de los endosulfanes en un 11%. Esta es una de las muchas tablas que se realizaron referente a los grupos y a cada uno de sus compuestos, sus límites de detección, sus medias, sus mínimos y sus máximos de cada uno en particular. Así también se realizaron diferentes gráficas. En este caso mostramos una de frecuencia de aparición en donde se muestran cada uno de los 20 compuestos y la preferencia que tiene para alojarse en alguno de los dos órganos, tanto hígado o riñón. Para cada grupo en específico hicimos diferentes gráficas. En este caso mostramos el grupo de los llenos y cada uno de sus compuestos, seguido del grupo de los endosulfanes, en donde observamos los 3 compuestos. Y la única gráfica aquí que se muestra con unas diferencias significativas es el endosulfán 2, que realmente fue la única gráfica que mostró estas diferencias, porque de ahí en fuera, tanto los hexaclorociclohexanos, los 3 metabolitos de DDT, los 2 compuestos de heptacloros, en clordanos e incluso en el metoxicloro, no se encuentran realmente diferencias significativas entre ambos tejidos. Cuando pasamos a la comparación entre DDTs y hexaclorociclosanos entre grasa y tejidos, sí se observan muestras significativas y una clara disposición a alojarse en diferentes tejidos. Por ejemplo, para los DDTs se muestra una preferencia clara para alojarse en la grasa, mientras que para los hexaclorociclohexanos se muestra una clara preferencia para alojarse en el hígado. Y estas son algunas de las áreas que son impactadas por COPS dentro del estado de Campeche. Finalmente, en las conclusiones observamos que de los 33 varamientos, en su mayoría fueron machos varados en 2015 y en la época de Nortes. Los años en donde más subieron estos varamientos fueron del 2014 al 2016 con 18 varamientos, en su mayoría siendo crías y adultos. Se identificaron estos 7 diferentes grupos que hemos venido tratando de COPS, y en específico ya hablando más respecto a muestras, en las muestras de hígado la que mayor presentó concentraciones elevadas fue el H5, de hecho macho, mostrando dienos, DDTs, heptacloros y clordanos en su mayoría, mientras que en las de riñón la que mayor presencia de compuestos fue la R15, en donde se presentaron dienos, endosulfanes, HCH y clordanos. Y respecto a las muestras de hígado, el compuesto en general que más tuvo presencia fue el clorano con un 37%, mientras que para las muestras de riñón, como ya les había mencionado, estuvo un poco más cerrado entre los dienos y los clordanos, siendo en general ambas con un 35% de aparición. Las 55 muestras de hígado de riñón registraron un 100% aplasia organoclorados de alto riesgo sistémico, genérico y de salud pública, lo que denota una clara existencia de contaminación dentro del área a la cual todos los organismos nos vemos expuestos por estos contaminantes que son perturbadores hormonales y cancerígenos. Los 20 compuestos encontrados son derivados de la actividad agrícola en las inmediaciones de la laguna de términos, las cuales son acarreados por ríos que desembocan en ella y que van transfiriéndose a través de la trama trófica, lo que representa un riesgo de salud no solo para la tonina, sino para los demás organismos, como ya dije, incluyéndonos los humanos, por lo cual se confirma el papel que tiene la especie como centinela ambiental. Y aunque México cuenta con un avance significativo respecto al control de COPS, existe un evidente contraste respecto a los avances logrados en materia de monitoreos y análisis, por lo cual todavía queda un gran campo de investigación en esta área y en áreas impactadas por COPS. Para cuestiones de restauración, nosotros creemos que sería viable la utilización de medidas para la bioremediación para una mejor recuperación. Muchas gracias a todos.
Adelante.
Muy buenas tardes, gracias por permanecer con nosotros. Continuando con el programa, a continuación, José Ángel Vences Martínez nos va a presentar educación ambiental en el ecosistema de manglar de la laguna de Nusco, Guerrero, México. Adelante, gracias.
Mi nombre es José Ángel Vences Martínez y les voy a presentar nuestro tema de educación ambiental en el ecosistema de manglar de la laguna de Nusco, Guerrero, México. Bien, los ecosistemas costeros son importantes sobre todo para la seguridad, la soberanía y el desarrollo sustentable. Sabemos que México es uno de los países con ecosistemas costeros más frágiles y vulnerables, sobre todo por fenómenos naturales y actividades antropogénicas. Es por esto la importancia de llevar a cabo programas de conservación, restauración, pero sobre todo que se sienten las bases sobre la educación ambiental, ya que puede ser un parteaguas para llevarnos hacia un manejo sustentable que impacte en la calidad de vida de los pobladores. Entre estos ecosistemas de los que se habla, de los que habla el autor o menciona el autor, sobresalen las lagunas costeras y por ende el ecosistema de manglar. En el estado de Guerrero es necesario implementar políticas que estén enfocadas hacia el aprovechamiento sustentable. Existe escasa información acerca de este tipo de programas y la que existe pues no se le ha dado continuidad, ¿no? Entonces es importante implementar estas medidas, pues sobre todo porque el ecosistema de manglar pues tiene diversas afectaciones por la tala irracional, el cambio de uso de suelo, dispersión de residuos sólidos urbanos en los márgenes de la laguna. Este es un mapa en el que se observa en color verde el ecosistema de manglar que existe en estos dos cuerpos de agua, tanto la laguna de Nusco como el estero El Plan. Lo que es importante recalcar es esta superficie en color café que está destinada a actividades agrícolas pecuarias, entonces son importantes también. Es importante señalar esto porque es fundamental hacer énfasis en que las diversas actividades también son parte de la falta de programas de aprovechamiento sustentable y que son causas de la deforestación de manglar, ¿no? Al haber cambios de uso de suelo. El objetivo de este programa, de esta investigación, fue desarrollar, aplicar y evaluar un taller de educación ambiental no formal en el ecosistema de manglar de la laguna de Nusco, el cual pueda coadyuvar con la sensibilización en cambio de el área de estudio se encuentra en la laguna de Nusco. Fue necesario trabajar, o afortunadamente nos encontramos con una organización, una asociación civil llamada Dios, Hombre y Mangle en la colonia 20 de noviembre. Bien, pues el desarrollo, aplicación y evaluación de ese taller de educación ambiental lo trabajamos a través de lo propuesto por Nieto Caraballo y Buendía y a través de la metodología basada en competencias para lo cual fue importante o es importante señalar que se trabajó con promotores ambientales, alumnos de la Escuela Superior de Desarrollo Sustentable,
promoting sustainable development of those who were the facilitators in charge of providing this workshop to the population. This workshop has a name, the Mangrove of My Locality, Mr. Shalka, for the civil organization. So as part of the methodology, it is important to go to the population, which is something that all of the different presenters did. They presented also what the scope from the workshop were. In order to have the goal of the icebreaker, we did a integration workshop based on a puzzle where they would have to talk about and let us know about some of the environmental issues that they have observed surrounding the lagoon and what solution they could come up with. We did some different assessments, and as part also of the topic or the main topic to discuss, we talked about the importance and the function of the mangrove. They afterwards took a tour and they identified the 4 different types of mangrove that exist on the lagoon, and they connected the different types of flower, fruits, where they integrated a botanic press. We did a final assessment, and the workshop was also assessed as part of the methodology for part of them. And we trained different environmental workshops with different workshops, different stages of the workshops, and 4 students of the Sustainable Development School attended. The workshops were each made up by 10 people. Here we can observe on the pictures where all of the different facilitators or moderators were assessing this integration workshop in order to implement it on the target population. They also did this tour which was replicated. So this is the sign about this workshop where we're discussing about the importance as well as the functioning of the mangrove's importance in the body of water, the characteristics for each of these mangroves. A part of the legal framework, since the mangrove's ecosystem is usually used for fences, branches. It is also used as fuel since they tend to cook with wood. So it was very important to present the legal framework to the population. Here we can see with these pictures and observe the target population here is already working on a puzzle regarding the environmental issues of the locality as part of the integration workshop in order to act as an icebreaker. And the second picture is of the population identifying the different type of mangroves, collecting samples in order to do the botanic press, as it is shown in these 2 figures where they're working both the moderators as well as the target population. As part of the assessment, both for diagnostic and the final assessment, was celebrated gathering the knowledge or the learning that was required, because on this final assessment they got a higher score than expected. And this is a civil population that is mainly focused on the preservation of the mangrove ecosystem. Has been, aside from this, there's been some other different workshops and trainings, and they have acted as sort of guardians of their mangrove ecosystem. So basically, the workshop and the assessment, besides from assessing the members of the population, it was for sharing the learning acquisition, and the workshop was also assessed by them, by the population. So in my locality, the workshop was assessed both in the teaching strategies and the learning material and the expectations. It was assessed as from good to excellent. So in our conclusions, we can say that this education and environmental education workshop help us increase the environmental knowledge, because they have vast knowledge and the years that they have been living in this ecosystem where this locality is settled. They have acquired a series of knowledge that have become environmental knowledge, which has allowed us to perform this workshop to such a degree. So their learning, their understanding and knowledge of the environment and what we were able to share through this environment education workshop allowed us to really help them design a management plan for their mangroves. So the workshop, once again, was assessed from good to excellent. And it might play an important role for mitigating impact caused by anthropogenous activities. Well, thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much, Jose Angel. That was super interesting, your presentation. Very valuable, the experience you shared with us. So we're just waiting to see if anybody has any questions. We still have 1 minute to spare. So if anybody has a question for Jose Angel, now's the time. So there aren't any questions, Jose Angel. Thank you so much for your participation, and we will continue. Thank you. Thank you so much. We will now continue. Thank you, Jose, Gloria Palma. And let's please now give it up for our next presenter, Jose Luis Gloria Palma, for the hydrological restoration of mangroves in the San Crisanto Ejido. Thank you so much, and go for it, Jose. Thank you so much. I'm going to be presenting a 25-year of experience work for this mangrove from Mexico gathering. So I would like to say that San Cristano is a coastal community that is part of the Sinanche municipality in Yucatan, and we've been working on the restoration process since 1995. So this was caused by the different damages that were inflicted on the mangrove. And the origin of this was
humedad porque no tenía flujos hidrológicos. El otro problema fueron los impactos de huracanes, tanto Gilberto como Isidoro, y este último
Gilberto and Isidoro hurricane, and this last one caused a 99% damage rate. between these two hurricanes in 1995, there were other two hurricanes in 15 days, just like the experience that we just went through this week, which caused a very, very strong flood, and we had to take actions. Therefore, we decided to recover the hydrological flow of the mangrove and begin restoration. The specific goals was to locate the cenotes cenotes within the mangrove, to locate the canals and value the possible as well as the profiting from it. So the localities, San Crisanto, Sinanche, in Yucatan, the United States of Mexico. Here's a chart where we can find the locality of the municipality of the different sands of the Ejido, as well as the mangrove area. The goal: to restore 10,000 meters of canals and to clean 25 cenotes in an area of 1,020 hectares. So the work plan is to do a previous test, to start with some short canals. The first canal that we did was 70 meters long, and the second one was 130 meters from its mouth. So this is a side of how the whole maintenance program took place and how the different cleaning endeavors took place in 1995. I want to clarify that this is a completely community-based, driven, conducted, managed by the community. After these two tests were done, the canal of Donotsit and the reacting of the flow of the water for the constructiveness of the highway form an equipment for practical, and we were able to locate the previous canals and cenotes. Now, with the support of a crocus of the area that is occupied the mangrove, that we didn't have any GPS back then, we didn't know, and we were based on the experience and knowledge of the area, and we got this result. 10,700 meters of canal located and 78 cenotes within the area. This is a list of a chart that was handmade of the Ejido, where we enlisted all the different canals. This is now with the transect line site, because this afterward resulted in a monitoring of the whole area, both in the mangrove as well as for the species within the mangrove. So we were able to see the canals that are inside the mangrove, which are around 11,300 restored by 2002. These are the different cenotes that have been geolocated. The tangible results up to now: the area has been registered as a management conservation area. We restored 11,300 meters of canals between 1996 and 2002. 40 cenotes were cleaned and restored, and before Hurricane Isidoro, we had done an assessment of the mangrove vegetation. We restarted this from 2004 to 2010, and between all of the area, and once again we put a pause in 2014 after the blue carbon concept was being developed. We retook the monitoring in based on a methodology that we adopted in transversal lines inside the mangrove, as we saw in the previous chart. From 2017 on, they told us there was a Mexican norm for the certification of the carbon certification, so we applied for it, and we were not able to complement it because there aren't any qualified technicians for this norm, and we had the Forestal Protocol of Mexico that really could provide us with the support, and they couldn't. The results we have for now from this monitoring is the baseline with an average of 157.4 ton of blue carbon per hectare, and the baseline considering the depths from 2.5 centimeters of underground carbon, which are 734 tons to now, with a total, because of the 850 hectares of the carbon, of 623,900 tons, which means 20% of the vehicle park, or the equivalent consume of 250,000 people. So that's the importance that San Crisanto mangrove has in the 250 hectares. Something we would have never known if we hadn't stored this work as a community. So this is some pictures of how we've performed this work. Now, with the Mexican standard and norm and the Forestal Protocol, we were able to design the different parcels. They were allocated randomly based on different charts nightly. We also have crocodile monitoring. We have 250 crocodiles recorded to date. We have also received environmental education. We receive a lot of technical visits from different schools. We have exchanges with other communities who come visit us. And we also have nature tourism after having restored these mangroves. And in 2019, because this year is an atypical year, we received 25,000 visitors. Awards and recognitions received by the actions that resulted from what the Ejido has done along with the foundation is the honor mention of the National Award of Ecological Merit in 1999, the National Ecological Merit Award in 2000, the second national place for the preservation of natural heritage and cultural by Semarnat in 2002, the Award Day Harbor in 2006 by the National Arbor Day Foundation, Equatorial Prize of PUND in 2010, the Forestal Award in 2011, and Energy Global won in 2014 as the best sustainable project in Mexico. Different collaborative agreements we have with the University of Yucatan, with the Technological University of Merida, and an international level. We also participate the technical advisor of the Equatorial Initiative, the Assemble Consultation Advisory from North American, in NASA also for prevention of risk and decreasing disaster, and the GEF for civil society and community. So in very, very short time, just in a spread of wings, we have this quick summary of 25 years of work that us in the community, we're very proud of having developed this, of continue developing it, because our goal is by 2021 to have hired the sales of environmental services through carbon bonds, which we estimate are going to be around 6,000 tons of air carbon. So we are giving space to our students of the Technological of Merida and from other universities as well for the monitoring, in order for them to understand what the project is about and for them to learn about this super important ecosystem such as the mangrove. So that's it for me. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. You can also look for us on Facebook as Sacrisanto official website. You can also look for us on the www.sacrisanto.net. And there's 3 case studies that have been published by the United Nations, the ONG, and the UNESCO. Thank you very much. And here you've got my email, and I'll be more than happy to answer anything you would like to ask. Jose, thank you very much for your presentation. That was very interesting, very impressive, all of the hard and amazing work that you've been performing for this many years. Let me check if there are any questions from the audience. The audience today has been extremely quiet, but I would like to actually ask you a question, Jose. So what would your recommendation be for other communities that perhaps have not accomplished to build this information of baseline studies that might help them improve the conditions of their mangrove communities? So what would your recommendations be for them? First of all, recognizing that the mangrove ecosystem is a system that must be protected, that must be preserved, and that preservation is a business. Our mangrove generates 2 million pesos a year without the carbon bonds. But the important part here is this feeling of ownership and the collective management from the area. The mangrove cannot be managed by parcels, by hectares. It must be managed holistically, and it must be seen from that perspective, because the trees, the insects, the fish, the birds, all the flora and fauna associated to it, both microscopic and macroscopic, all of it has a value. When we started with the first crocodile I observed was in 1997. Today, if I don't pay attention, I have another one in my backyard. We have like a 3,000 crocodile population, and we're thinking about how to profit from it because this becomes also a source of income for the community. But all of this needs to be done by determining the own capacity of the mangrove and understanding how much you can extract without it impacting. Thank you so much, Jose. We do have a couple of comments on the chat. Berenice Vasquez and Carolina Velasquez would like to congratulate you. They say it's been an amazing work. Dulce Infante also would like to say congratulations for this monitoring effort. And once again, we do have a little bit of time if anybody else would like to make a comment or a question about this outstanding work that Jose just presented. We still have time, so please use this time wisely. Okay, so I think this has been it. Jose, thank you so much, but I don't think that there are any additional comments mentioned. So I would just like to once again thank you for this tremendous effort that you and your work team are performing. I think it's an example to be followed by many, and just truly congratulations for all of your accomplishment. Thank you so much, Doctor. We'll be keeping an eye out for you, and thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Muy buenas tardes, continuamos con esta sesión muy interesante y
Interesting presentation, and the following one will be provided by Carlos Alberto Martinez Marquez, who will be presenting another study in another community who have been working very intensively and very importantly in Tabasco regarding the importance of the mangrove for the ejidatarios of the Úrsulo Galván ejido in the municipality of Jalapa de Méndez in Tabasco. Thank you, Marty.
Buenas tardes, esperando se encuentren bien en estos momentos de contingencia.
I hope that everyone is okay during this contingency time. I would like to thank you for the opportunity of allowing me to participate in this fifth ecosystem of mangroves in Mexico, the importance of the mangrove for the people of the ejido of Úrsulo Galván in the municipality of Jalapa de Méndez in Tabasco. We want to present from Benito Silvan Garcia and from me, Carlos Alberto Martinez Marquez. As a way of introduction, I would like to say that mangroves are holistic ecosystem from the coastal areas in the tropics, in the humid tropics, and the species that inhabit them are coromangles, and they are tolerant to high levels of salinity. They are sandy, shallow waters. In Tabasco, we have over 40,000 hectares of mangrove. The municipalities with a higher surface of this are Paradise, Cárdenas, Centla, Alta de Méndez, and Comalcalco. Also, mangroves provide us with services such as, for example, coastal protection, wind filtration, and a place to raise animals. These are some of the important that mangroves can provide. They also provide us with wood for the population. They are useful for different fences, portals, and also for tourism and recreation within the ecosystem. The ejido of Úrsulo Galván is part of the Alta de Méndez municipality in the state of Tabasco in Mexico. It is located around 22 kilometers from the head of the municipal area between the Campo Mectocan ranch and the third section ranch, the Nicolás Bravo ranch from the Paraíso Tabasco municipality. Also with some mangrove forest and lagoons, such as the Composú one, the Tinaja lagoon, and the Eslavón lagoon. This would be the Úrsulo Galván ejido and its location. In order to gather the necessary information, we used an interview guide as well as a field notebook in order to be able to visualize and understand and in order not to get out of the script. We also used an audio recorder in order to have the most accurate possible information, and we used GPS as well as photographic cameras. First, we selected a site, and once we selected the site, we continued by performing a prospective type of visit with the goal of getting to know the site and getting familiar with the members of the ejido, the population of the area, and accomplish a very trustworthy environment filled with confidence and good relations with the population, as well as a kind environment with them. We also accomplished to introduce the project, right? We performed 48 interviews, meaning everyone that was inside of the ejidatario title of the community. Anyone who was part of this title per se, they were interviewed for this work, and each ejidatario expressed their knowledge regarding the mangrove as well as the different problematic related to the ejido. The interviews were usually during the afternoon, which is when these ejidatarios are in their homes resting after a hard day's work. From the total number of the interviewees, we realized that most of them have a 54% who have an interaction with the mangrove every day, meaning that they only have enough money from it to purchase food, meaning they live from on a day-to-day basis. 30% that receive a monthly income directed by the government for people of the third age or the elderly. 48 people were interviewed, and they all talked about the work they perform in the ejido, which is completely dedicated to the reforestation of 3 different types of mangrove: white, red, and Sopra mangrove, which is the first one we see on the video, with the white mangrove, which is from the Villarracenosa area, and the black mangrove in the Mazatlán Mejerdas. These are the 3 different species that we found on our ejido, which have allowed them to have economic benefit as well as the satisfaction of contributing to the environment. Because the mangrove acts as a barrier for protecting them from hurricanes and storms, as well as a habitat for several species. From mangroves, we can also gather materials such as firewood, which are used from the dry areas, or those which are on the ground. Also, when they receive permits for cutting, they use them for different punctals, water construction, for livestock and their animals in their backyards, and to build them fences. Aside from mangroves, they also harsh kilbas. They have different types of trees also planted, which are trees that will allow them to produce good wood and to provide economic and environmental benefits, such as oak, amongst others. The mangrove ecosystem has high importance, such as social importance, for it allows for the integration of the members of the ejido, and it helps in the economy, the family economy, and it also has ecological and environmental importance for the preservation of the ecosystems. Regarding the social aspect, the integration of all of the ejidatarios in order to work in an organized manner for cleaning all of the different sites or for the conditioning, they perform different patronage sort of activities, like the festivity of Esquipula, which takes place in January. During this festivity, the ejidatarios prepare some sort of meal for all of their guests who are close and would like to celebrate this festivity. Now, for the economic aspect of the mangrove, we can gather firewood as a source of fuel for their home. They can use some sort of fauna species as food, like the hink, the fish, and some birds. This is due to the fact that the community is right next to some lagoons. They also consume shrimp. These species only come by seasons, they're seasonals, and they can also both consume them and sell them. Some of the leaves are also important for the environment, and when they need them, they can help protect them, and also they receive some other species such as coconut. For the reforestation, they have, for example, greenhouses in their own homes, which are watered every day, and those who do not have space can do it near the shore. Once these plants are ready, they're taken to the ejidal landscape and they are planted, and they're given some sort of maintenance and conservation. People will receive a 100 pesos payment by days of work, which is from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. It's very ecological in the preservation of the ecosystems as well as the care of it, meaning when there are different forestal educational workshops, they, for example, get organized to put a fire out. It also serves as a species such as the different garces, raccoons, amongst others. However, all of these species have decreased their number and their abundance in recent years. This is very important to highlight and recognize. On the other hand, ejido families have a respite and are very interested in caring for the environment, and they participate in different workshops. However, there's still a lack of information for environmental issues. The different nearby streams are used as a different bathhouses by families, and they also use it for water, sometimes their own home animals such as dogs, chickens, chicks, with the corn that they harvest themselves, and that way they avoid the expense of purchasing them. We can also find different banana, papaya, lime, and orange, and these species are used for different things. This way they can help them both to consume and have some economical saving and gain. The mangroves are very important ecosystem that satisfy economic need as well as alimentary or feeding needs, and they satisfy also a social-cultural bond between the population. Families might have some traditional harvesting and dependency on the local resources. There is a evaluation of the use in order to propose different methods for the correct management and profiting, as well as promoting and fostering environmental education amongst the population of the community and tending to the needs of the population, since they are the ones who are in constant interaction with the natural resources. Thank you everyone for your attention, and thank you for the Ejido of Úrsula Galvan for all of their support throughout the work. Thank you.
Adelante, doctor Everardo.
Muchas gracias, Carlos Alberto.
Thank you very much, Carlos Alberto. We are here trying to read if there are any questions from our audience. But there's a little bit of a time lapse between the presentation and the chat, so I'm just gonna actually take up the opportunity and ask you if in the community you're working on, as I understand, there are several different communities in these municipalities like Jalpa, Paraíso, right? That have been working in recent years in a very important way regarding the conservation of mangroves. So is there any experience exchange between these three different communities? Yes, there are different experience exchange between and learning experiences. The communities every day, they are starting to relate more and more. This is very recent. I mean, we need to understand that, let's assume that we're kind of new on these regards, right? Because the experience, some communities did have it, but there wasn't really a lot of exchange. And I think now, because of all of the technology, or because we're updating, you know, there is more of a communal sharing experience, both at a national, community, and international level. Great, excellent. Well, amazing. Since I'm gonna make use of the microphone since there are no more questions. So what would your recommendations be? You know, as our Sacrosanto colleague, what would you tell other communities or other producers who would be interested in working with this beautiful ecosystem? Gee, doctor. I think those of us who work on this, we're making recommendations all day long. But what we definitely need to do is create awareness amongst everyone about the importance that mangroves have for the communities, not only for those that live nearby, but for everyone in general. Because as a lot of people have said, they're very, very important. That would be the most important thing, I believe. Being able to do that exchange and awareness, and afterwards probably training the members of the population that are colliding with the mangroves, because even if there is some sort of ancestral knowledge or this kind of ecological hereditary knowledge of everything that exists, we must also understand that we can allow them to take prevention, you know, by providing them with better management than the one that they might be implementing. So there are a couple of things that we can look at, and perhaps making a different valuation process of all of the services provided by the ecosystem. So yeah, there are a lot of things lacking, but there's also a lot of commitments and abundance that we can acquire, each of us as members of a population. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Carlos Alberto. It was a pleasure. We're right on time, so I apologize that we weren't able to receive more questions, but we do have the recording. And we would truly like to just thank you for your important contribution to this ecosystem. Thank you. I would like to make the most and just thank everyone, for the organizers and also for all of the communities who are participating in order to continue their hard work. This is just the first steps of better processes that will be able to be developed. Thank you and congratulations, everyone. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Adelante, doctor Everardo.
Muy buenas tardes, qué bueno que siguen con nosotros, qué interesantes charlas, ¿verdad? Entonces ahora le vamos a invitar a nuestros siguientes ponentes, Sujei Ambrosio Ramírez,